my hand, no price of room. When I was 15 years old, when I got saved, I probably didn't have nothing in my pocket worth anything. Appreciate being proven, John.
While y'all up there, why don't y'all do number 187? We ain't sung that in a long time. Well, we'll learn it.
Just I was raised in a home that knew the Lord, but I'm thankful that God saved me out of some things, and I'm thankful that He saved me to some things. And it says I'll never turn back to this world anymore. The devil may fight me in a lot of things or bring back temptations that I don't long for spiritually, but I praise His precious name for His special place where I can just lean on Him. I'm thankful that He's strong enough to hold me. I'm thankful that He's strong enough to hold all of us. Bless His holy name. He's been faithful to everything. He sure is worthy.
I was waiting to see Amanda. Been wanting Amanda to sing for a long time.
Richard, can we sing 110?
We do that while she's looking for a song. I've been wanting Amanda to sing one for us for a long time.
Place of legends. every blessing. Turn my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing. Call for souls of loudest praise. Teach me songs of melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mountain fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love. Here I'll raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God. He to rescue me from danger interposed his precious blood. Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness, like a fetter, bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above.
Appreciate that. Let's go to the Lord in a word of prayer tonight. Good to see you in the Lord's house this evening. Brother Junior Nix, how about you praying for us, brother? Amen. Thank you, Brother Junior. All right, 1 Thessalonians chapter number 3 tonight. 1 Thessalonians chapter 3. We want to pick up where we left off last time in our study in this chapter. I didn't necessarily intend for this thought to be a two-part series, but it's what the Lord has for it. And so I'm excited about getting into this passage with you tonight to see what the Lord has for us. Would like to thank Brother Mike, and he invited me to come and preach at the assisted living home today. And so I appreciate that opportunity. Appreciate his faithfulness there week after week. And those people really love him, and you can tell that they do. And I appreciate him being faithful where God has placed him at this time. 1 Thessalonians 3, we began this passage again last time, and we began looking, we were trying to look around verses number 1 through verses number 8. I think we made it through verses 1 and 2, so tonight we're going to focus on verses 3 through 8, and I think pretty confidently that we can make it tonight through these verses. I guess I'll have to subtract time. I preached long this morning. Eli had got sick right before church. That's where they're at tonight. And he was running a fever, and he come to my office during Sunday school and said that he needed to lay down, and he went to sleep. And that's not like Eli. And I might have said Abishai. Did I say Abishai? I don't know. I get them confused. Yeah. My mom always used to mix me and my brother up. She's like, you know who I'm talking about. And I'm that way now. But Eli had gotten sick, so he came there and he laid down. And so I'd covered him up with my jacket, and he went to sleep. And so I told Cassie, I said, I don't know if I'd wake him up. That's why I didn't preach with a jacket on this morning. He had my jacket. And so anyway, he slept all the way through service. And I was joking with Cassie after service. She said, "Boy, you went a little long this morning, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess in that circumstance, it really did seem like it was long. So I'll try to cut a little bit off tonight. So we'll shoot for an hour and a half instead of 2 hours. How about that?" And but no, I appreciate your patience. I'm probably more mindful of time than anybody in here, because I know that the mind can only take in what the backside can handle. You know what I'm saying? So when you get wore out sitting, you quit listening. And I'm not up here just for the sake of talking, and I want you to grasp what we're saying, what we're trying to get from the Word of God. So enough of that. The narrative of this chapter still carries over from chapter number 2 and verse number 17, where Paul said, "But we, brethren, being taken from you for a short time, in presence, not in heart, endeavored to the more abundantly to see your face with great desire." And remember, Paul had to leave because persecution and affliction had come in. Those Jews were chasing him from town to town, and he had to leave. And so he felt like that as a parent was torn away from their child, he felt like that he had left them orphaned. He had taken off to Athens, later wound up in Corinth, and that's where he's writing this letter from. That burden is still beating in his heart. And we're looking at this passage from the vantage point of when a preacher can't handle it anymore. And that's what Paul is experiencing here. He just can't handle the questions without answers. He can't handle the distance, if you will. And so verse number 1, "Wherefore, when we could no longer forbear," and you remember Paul used that word there, and he'll use it again in verse number 5, "For this cause when I could no longer forbear." The word picture there, it's like a water barrier that's holding back water, and there's a little crack in it, and it starts streaming just a little, and then the crack gets bigger, and what you thought you were holding back, all of a sudden it breaks, if you will, and it comes gushing out. And there's some emotions that Paul thought he had quelled, that he was able to keep in check and keep under control. And we find out in this chapter they just erupted on him. And so he said that he could no longer forbear in verse 1. We thought it good to be left alone, or in Athens alone. And that was the first thing we looked at, that a preacher that can't take it anymore, he needs to be left alone. And he stood alone. He was alone, so those people didn't have to be alone. Verse number 2, "And sent Timotheus." And we look secondly of how that a pastor that can't handle alone will lean on his assistant. And so he sends Timothy, if you will, in his place to minister to these people. "Our brother, a minister of God and fellow laborer in the gospel of Christ." Now his purpose of coming was twofold: to establish you, number 1, and number 2, to comfort you concerning your faith. And so tonight let's pick up verses 3 through 8. "That no man should be moved by these afflictions, for yourselves know that we are appointed thereunto. For verily, when we were with you, we told you before that we should suffer tribulation, even as it came to pass, and you know. For this cause, when I could no longer forbear, I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter have tempted you, and our labor be in vain. But now, when Timotheus came from you to us, and brought us good tidings of your faith and charity, and that ye have good remembrance of us always, desiring greatly to see us, as we also to see you. Therefore, brethren, we were comforted over you in all our afflictions and distress by your faith. For now we live, if you stand fast in the Lord." Heavenly Father, I pray that you'd help us now as we look in this epistle to the Thessalonians. I pray, Lord, that you would tune my heart, Lord, tune my mind to be in tune with you, Lord, that I would seek your guidance. I pray, Lord, that you would help me to help your people. I pray, Lord, that we would say what needs to be said. In Jesus' name, amen. So Paul has sent Timothy back. He has gone to establish these believers. He's gone to comfort them concerning their faith. So a pastor that cannot handle it anymore, he's left alone. He leans on his assistants. And we're going to pick up verses number 3 and 4 together tonight, and we're going to look at the thought that he couldn't handle it anymore, so he looked for affliction. He looked for affliction. Now, the main reason Timothy was to go and to establish these believers and comfort them is because afflictions were coming. Matter of fact, before Timothy had made it back, affliction had already came. And so Paul is curious how these afflictions play out in the life of these believers, these new Christians, if you will. The word affliction, it's interesting. It means a pressing together. It means pressure, oppression, tribulation, distress, straits. That's not a pretty word, is it? Affliction. When you think of the word afflict, nothing good comes to mind. And so Paul is now writing, and he's concerned because afflictions have entered these newly professing Christians' lives, and he's wondering how they are faring in such circumstances. Notice what he said in verse 3, that no man should be moved by these afflictions. That means that Paul is saying that these individuals should not be shaken by their circumstance. The persecution and the tribulation and the rough road that they are trotting should not shake them. It's an interesting word picture. This is the only time this particular word is used in the Bible. And the word picture associated with that is the tail of a dog that wags. I've known some Christians that are that shaky. Have y'all known some Christians that are that shaky? And that's what Paul is saying. These afflictions that have come into their life, that it should not cause them to lose faith. It should not cause them to shrink in faith. It should not cause them just to throw their hands up and say, well, man, if this is what this is all about, I'm done with it. And so Paul begins to encourage them, though affliction has already came. Remember, Paul is now writing after Timothy he's went and he's came back and gave a report, and then that's what prompts Paul to write the epistle. So affliction has come, it's worked in their lives, and so Paul writes back and he's telling them why affliction should not move them. Number one, I want to say this: affliction in the Christian life should not move you, church, because it's not an accident, it's appointed. Look at what he said in verse 3, that no man should be moved by these afflictions, for yourselves know that we were appointed thereunto. Appointed thereunto. These afflictions were not an accident. They were appointed by God Almighty to take place in the life of these believers. The Christian life tonight, it's a calling not absent of tribulation and persecution and suffering, but it is one rather of enduring those things. Some people present the Christian life like it's a yellow brick road that you get on and it's joy and happiness and bubble gum and cotton candy all the way till you get to heaven. The Christian life is not one that is absent from tribulation, but the Christian life is a call to endure the afflictions that come our way. The attitude of a believer toward afflictions and persecution and tribulation and distress and whatever of those adjectives you want to throw in there, our attitude ought to be that it's not just a mere predicament, but it's God's appointed will for us at that moment. Now that's easy to preach, but that's a hard pill to swallow when it's happening to you. We're talking about things, we're talking about suffering, we're talking about pressure that God puts on a Christian, and it's His will that they go through those things. Number two, why we shouldn't be moved? Because they're appointed. Number two, because these believers and we have been forewarned about affliction. Look at what he says there. Verse number 4. For verily, when we were with you, we told you before that we should suffer tribulation. This did not blindside these believers in Thessalonica. Paul, when they got saved, Paul said, I'm telling you, it's coming. Tribulation and persecution and affliction, it is coming. You've got to admire the apostle. He was very candid about the life of a Christian, and he did not sugarcoat the hardships. Christianity then, during that day, was a call to suffer. We almost present salvation like Christianity is the good life. Living our best life now. Every day's sunny. The sun always shines. We're as happy as a dog in the sunlight. That's all the sun analogies I got. We present this idea to sinners that way, and then when a new convert gets saved, and about 30 seconds after they've been washed in the blood, they walk out of the church and they've got to face the same devil that had a grip on their life before they got saved, and they're looking around wondering, what in the world? Nobody told me this. Brother Mike alluded to it tonight. Listen, just because you get saved don't mean that Satan is not going to try to bring up some of those old things in your life. So what you going to do then? Paul said that these Christians were forewarned. Christianity, I know this doesn't make much sense because we live in America and we're sheltered. I guess we're gracefully sheltered, but it hurts our church. Christianity is a call to suffer. Our idea in America is that Christianity is supposed to be mainstream. Everybody had, I remember the rave when everybody had the little fish on the back of the car. And people didn't even go to church, but they had a fish on the back of the car. I remember people would wear, what would WWJD when that was big? Everybody would wear the hats and the bracelets and the t-shirts. Those people didn't even own a Bible, man, and they were wearing WWJD stuff. Listen, we've got the mentality that Christian ought to be, and Christian is in the mainstream. But I'm telling you, real Christianity has never been in the mainstream. Biblical Christianity has never been popular. All the young people better listen to me. If you give your life to Christ, as far as you being saved and you surrender your life to Christ to live godly while you're young, you might as well go ahead and just get over the idea of you ever being popular. It's not going to happen. You're not going to have all the friends. You're not going to be the coolest kid in the room. It just is not going to happen. But we raise church kids with the mentality that you are a Christian, so you're supposed to be popular. But the thing is about that biblical Christianity is that when you start preaching to young people about how they're supposed to live different than the world, that crowd walks out. I'll go a step further. When you start preaching about how adults ought to live different in a world, and we move past the little teenage peer pressure and we get into the fact that you're supposed to look different, you're supposed to act different, you're supposed to listen to stuff that's different, people tune out. Well, you know, that's old fogey stuff. Listen, God called, in Christianity, we're supposed to be different. But we've got this, and this is one reason why I'm so against the contemporary movement of our day, because they are trying their best. They want to hold the gospel on one side and the world on the other side. You can't have it both ways, friend. Paul said, listen, you name the name of Christ, you live like Christ tells you to live, there's going to be some persecution and afflictions that come your way. Mark it down. You know, I think Paul's not the first person to say that. It's crazy because there was this man that lived a couple of years before Paul, and I classify him as a man just to kind of be facetious with the point. But you know, he came and said some things that flipped the world upside down, and the world just didn't embrace him. They put him on a cross. You know what Jesus said? You know, the man that come and wasn't the most popular person in the room? Do you want to know what he said in John 16:33? These things have I spoken unto you, that in me you might have peace. In the world you shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. This idea of tribulation is coming our way, church. I was riding down the road today, and I was just driving by some of the churches. I won't name them just because God ain't telling me to. But I was just driving by, looking at the people. Brother Richard, this thought come to my mind. And then I thought back to Fairfield, because everything I think comes back to Fairfield. I'm not going to be one of those that always points out and we never point in. But when the rubber meets the road and persecution really happens, how many people are really going to show up at that church? Let me put it to you like this. I follow some people that are some pretty forward thinkers, and as far as maybe they see trends and things coming. And one of these men suggested the fact that probably the first wave of persecution is going to come kind of like this, that there might be a government agent that stands at the door and says, "Oh, are you planning on going to church today? Well, let me go ahead and up your tax rate." And so, okay, you want to be a Christian? Well, that church doesn't accept LGBTQ or whatever, all the other letters they throw in there. Okay, well, they don't really accept that. So if you're going to identify with them, let me go ahead and just up your tax rate. So let me ask you, are you going to be willing to come to church paying a 35, 45, 50% tax rate increase on your money? How many people do you think Brother Richard would say, well, you know, I ain't that fanatic now. But what if it just starts that way? I'm not saying it, I'm just saying, what if it starts that way? Or what is it going to be, church, when we have a real left, and I'm not here to get in politics, but what is it going to be when we have a real liberal left-wing nut get into office and they say, okay, if you're really going to be serious about the biblical view of marriage, we're just going to take away all that tax write-offs the church get. What are we going to do then, church, when we say, okay, we're going to have to start paying property taxes on this building? I wonder what I don't even know what our building value is at, Brother Gene. I mean, I don't know, but it's probably pretty high. So what are we going to do, church, when that comes? I'm going to tell you, when they do that, my dad, when he pastored Hog Mountain, when he went to the church there, they had about 12 or 15 people, and they're sitting right in the middle of Gwinnett County. That property's pretty valuable that they're sitting on. There ain't no way they're going to be able to afford that if the church has to pay that amount. So what's it going to come to, church? We're going to have to pay more money to go to church? The point I'm trying to make is listen, it is coming. Some way, some fashion, it's coming. Brother Chad, our kids are going to deal with it. We've witnessed a more militant spirit in our country towards Christianity probably in the last 10 years than has manifest. Would you agree, Brother Richard? Just more militant. It's anti-God, more anti, and it's coming. Paul said, you know what shouldn't shake you, church? You shouldn't say, well, this world's just going to hell in a handbasket. Who cares? I'm done with this. Paul said, I've warned you. That Bible has told us plainly it's coming. It shouldn't shake us. It shouldn't shake us. Let me say this, what he goes on to say. Affliction should not move us. I like the way verse 4 reads, for verily when we were with you, we told you before that we should suffer tribulation, even as it came to pass. You know why suffering should not move you? Because it came to pass. It's the idea that there's a season of suffering. It don't last forever. It's a season. It's like the old preacher said. Somebody said, well, what's your favorite verse in the Bible? He said, well, I don't really have a favorite verse. It's more of a phrase. They said, well, what is that? He said, it came to pass. They said, why that phrase? He said, I love that because it came to pass. It didn't come to stay. God may allow that season, but you can believe that that season will pass in your life. Then lastly, afflictions are beneficial for the Christian. Even as it came to pass, and you know. So now this is something they've experienced. Brother Robert, it's something that they are now acquainted with. They now know the benefit of affliction in their life. You say, what's that? Well, 1 Peter 1:7, it proved the reality of their faith. 2 Corinthians 1:4, it now enables them to comfort other Christians who are going to be suffering. And in Romans 5:3, it developed special graces in their life that added to their faith. I got to close. A preacher that can't handle it anymore, he looks for affliction. It's coming. But then let me say this. He couldn't handle it anymore, so he learned the adversary in verse number 5. For this cause, when I could no longer forbear, I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter had tempted you, and our labor be in vain. Now notice he didn't say, and your faith be in vain. He said, and our labor be in vain. You see, there was a work there that Paul had invested time in. And ain't it just like our adversary to take the hour of a trial and throw a temptation in there, a snare. Isn't it amazing in your life, if you'll just think about your Christian life for a second, when the pressure's on, when you feel the heat, when the potter has the fire turned up around the clay and it's on and you're being tried? Isn't it amazing how sometimes your flesh wants to, prone to wonder? Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. There's a pulling away. Do you want to know why? Because the adversary knows when to show up and throw a temptation in there. And so Paul said he's sitting back and he's worried because of all of the labor that he put on those people, that it would be in vain. Now, some would say here that they were really proving the veracity of their faith if they had faith to begin with. But I want to submit it to you again, Paul did not say that their faith was in vain, but rather his labor was in vain. Let me see if I can illustrate it this way. Let's see. I was going to ask Miss Hope, but I can't ask her. Let me see. All right, we'll use Miss Rachel. Well, I can't use Miss Rachel either. How old are you, Brother Gary? That's why I can't ask you. I can't ask your age. How old? 70. How old were you when you got saved? 14. Now, y'all hang with me. Somebody do the math. How long has he been saved? 56 years? All right. How long have you been a member here? Okay, so all 56 years. So let's see, of the 56 years, who were your pastors? Brother Guy Lee, and then Brother Keith, and me. All right. 5. So 5. You've had, okay, 6. All right, so 6. We'll call it 6. Maybe 7. We'll say 7. All right. That's got to be pretty close. That's got to be pretty close. All right, so 7. Now, y'all hang with me. Y'all with me? 56 years. You've had 7 pastors. All right? So let's say Brother Gary the Lord really puts him in a trial. And the Lord will lead you through those areas. Y'all agree with that? He'll let you go through some stuff. So you go through that trial, Brother Gary. Well, during the middle of that pressure, our adversary, the tempter, comes along, and he throws a snare in there, and you go for it wholeheartedly. And you disqualify yourself from being a deacon. You act in such a way that we have to church you off our church roll. God forbid. But y'all just hang with me. Brother Gary, you mess up so bad you ain't even qualified to lead in silent prayer. You with me? All right. That's how bad we're talking. Some of y'all get that in a little while. 56 years and 7 pastors worth of labor gone in vain. He's still saved. He's still going to heaven. But he has marred his testimony, ruined himself in such a way to where he can no longer be used in the office that the church has called him for. And you think about all of those messages, all of those prayers, all of those sleepless Saturday nights, all of those early Sunday mornings that the pastors have prayed for you and done for you down through the years. But you're done. In vain. No wonder Paul's drinking Malox, popping Alka-Seltzers, worried to death. He had a lot of labor invested in these people. Let me close with this. We're right at 30 minutes. We're doing good. He couldn't handle it anymore. So he learned about the adversary. And we do have an adversary, church. Don't forget that. And he is out to wreck and to ruin your life. Brother Robert, how long you and Miss Phyllis been married?
42 years.
You would think, if you look at statistically, you would think, and I'm not saying, you would think Brother Mark and Miss Rachel would be more apt to divorce statistically than Brother Robert and Miss Phyllis. But I'm going to tell you what, Satan would love nothing more than to wreck your home, to wreck your marriage. And y'all ain't above it. You'd think 56 years? Well, he's not a young buck. What has he got to offer? Satan would love nothing more than to tear him apart. We've got an adversary. I could preach an hour right there, but I won't. Here we go. He couldn't handle it anymore, so he longed for advancement in verses 6 through 8. So Timothy goes. He encourages him. He comforts him. He shores him up. And now he comes back in verse 6. But now when Timotheus came from you to us and brought us good tidings of your faith and charity. Good tidings of your faith and charity. And that you have good remembrance of us always, desiring greatly to see us, as we also to see you. Therefore, brethren, we were comforted over you in all of our afflictions and distresses by your faith. For now we live if you stand fast in the Lord. He longed for these members' advancement. He heard that they were doing good, and not only were they doing good, but they were growing. That good tidings of faith and charity. Faith is Godward. That charity, that love and action is toward each other. One writer said that faith and charity is the sum of all godliness. If your faith towards God is increasing and your love towards your brother is increasing, you are living the Christian life. Can I pause just for a moment and say this? You can't have faith increase this way if we're not right with each other this way. People want to say they want to act how spiritual they are, and they've been holding a grudge for 40 years. Come on. It don't work that way. It'll increase that way. One writer put it this way: you can't cause the body just to grow in one area till you get 30, and then it just grows out. But you take a young man that's growing up, you can't, Brother Larry, you can't put a cement block on Grant's head and stop him from getting any taller. It don't work that way. You've got to have that full growth. They longed for fellowship with Paul in verse 6. They longed for that fellowship. I think it needs to be said, I've said it a lot, it seems like here lately, but it needs to be said, as a Christian, you ought to want to fellowship with other Christians. I understand being a light. I understand being salt. I understand being a witness. I understand going out. But I'm telling you, when it comes to the fellowship part of your life, the people you hang out with, your friends, it ought to be Christian influences. Look with me in 1 Corinthians 2:3. We're done. 1 Corinthians 2:3. That last verse, verse number 8, said, "For now we live if you stand fast in the Lord." It's amazing to me how that Paul's health, his physical well-being, was tied to the spiritual well-being of this church. When my dad took Hog Mountain, he didn't have any health issues at all. Within his first 2 years, he had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, started getting gray hair. It's a high-pressure job, man. But it's amazing how that, honestly, that a church's spiritual well-being will affect the physical well-being of the pastor. Let me prove it to you. 1 Corinthians 2:3. Now, you remember Paul left Thessalonica, went to Athens, stayed there just for a few moments, then went to Corinth. That's where he writes the letter back from. He's at Corinth when Timothy comes back to tell him. When he gets to Corinth, this is the physical shape of Paul in 1 Corinthians 2:3. "And I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling." Physically, he was not doing good at all. But when he heard the good tidings, in verse 7, "Therefore, brethren, we were comforted over you in all our afflictions and distresses by your faith. For now we live if you stand fast in the Lord." There's a funny picture that some of my preacher friends sent me here a couple of weeks ago. It's got a picture of about 104-year-old man. I mean, he's got wrinkles from here to here on his face. I mean, he ain't got no teeth, and he's just grinning from ear to ear. And the meme says this. It says, "I'm a pastor and I'm 30 and I'm feeling fine." That's how much, and I'm closing with this, I promise. That's how much Paul's heart yearned for these individuals. That's how much he longed for these individuals. We're standing tonight.